Hello, chess fans. Welcome to another edition of Chess Chat, a program designed to give you, the viewer, a better understanding and a deeper appreciation of the exciting world of chess. I am George Marjanian, your host, program director of the Wachusett Chess Club at Fitchburg State University. This club meets every Wednesday evening from 7 to 11 in room C-159 of the McKay Campus School at the university. And with me today at the FATV studio, in the control room, is our highly skilled director, Darren Dame of Fitchburg. Assisting him in cueing the moves of a game that we're going to present to you is our multi-time Wachusett Chess Club champion, Bruce Felton of Fitchburg. And on camera is one of our most devoted and long-standing members of the Wachusett Chess Club, Brian Bigelow of Leominster. And last but not least is my longtime colleague and associate, my co-host, Martin Lane of Lunenburg, one of the strongest and most active chess players in North Central Massachusetts. Hello, Marty.
Good evening, George.
Well, Marty, today we're going to focus our attention on one of the strongest chess players in New England. He is International Master Igor Foygel of Brookline, Massachusetts. Now, what do we know about Igor Foygel?
Well, Igor Foygel sort of appeared in Massachusetts in the 90s. He's originally from Russia, from Kiev, I think.
He was born in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine.
Right.
Actually, October 29th, 1947, which makes him 64 years old. And you said, yes, he came to this country, he immigrated in 1991, but before he came to this country, how old was he when he started playing chess? Now, here's a photo of him on the current cover of Chess Horizons.
Well, according to a biographical note on his website, he started to play at the age of 6.
Yes.
I think he mentions that his father gave him a gift of a chess book at the age of 10.
Yes.
And that's when he started to seriously study the game and realized that there was more to it than just pushing pieces around. And he then joined a chess club and he advanced fairly quickly. He was winning local and regional tournaments.
Right. Well, yeah. So he learned it at 6, got his first book from his father at 10, and then at the age of 15, he was an expert. He attained an expert's rating, but it took him 11 more years before he attained the title of master. And that was in 1974 that he became a master. But the following year, he started teaching at a chess school in Kiev. And then 2 years after that, he became the dean of the school.
Right.
And 2 years after that, he became the principal of the school. So he was very much involved with chess teaching.
Right.
And we should point out to our viewers that Igor Foygel, besides being a very strong player, is also one of this country's preeminent chess teachers and coaches. He's well known from coast to coast as a superb chess teacher. Now, he was involved with something with the Kiev's Army Sports Club. I think around he was involved. He was in the Army, and I think it was around 1988 in the 80s.
In the 80s, I think.
He started also teaching there at that club, or started some program?
It was, I guess, the Army Sports Club, the Red Army Sports Club. I don't know very much about it. But he mentions that all the players there, these weren't beginners anymore. He wasn't teaching young people. These were already masters and grandmasters that he was coaching.
Right.
And he has, he lists quite an impressive list of accomplished players that he coached and taught during that period.
Right. Now, after he came to the United States, and he settled in the Boston area, and finally actually settled in Brookline, which actually has a sizable Russian-Ukrainian community.
Right.
The following year, 1992, he competed in his first Massachusetts Open Championship, which is our tournament to determine our state championship,
right.
And he won it in 1992, and he's won it 6 times. He's either won it clear or tied. And he did it last year, 2010, in Leominster at the 4 Points by Sheraton Hotel.
Right.
He won the state championship. That was his 6th. But if I have our Darren Dame, our director, go back to that photo on the cover of Chess Horizons. This is the official magazine of the Massachusetts Chess Association. It says here, it says, what does it say here?
71st.
71st NE Open, New England Open winner, Igor Foygel. This is this was again taken at the at the tournament in Leominster.
Labor Day weekend.
Labor Day weekend. And this was his third New England Open Championship. He had won it in 2007, then he won it in 2009, and then this year, Labor Day weekend, he won the New England Open Championship. Yeah.
And he's also competed in the U.S. Championship
twice.
Yeah.
He did it, 2002 and 2003. So he is a well-known player and a very accomplished player and one of the strongest. And by the way, I looked up at how he stands nationwide. Right now, there are about a little more than 48,000 rated players in the United States. You know what his ranking is nationwide?
No, I don't.
He's actually currently ranked 64th out of 48,000 plus players in the world, I should say the country, and his ranking in the state. Now we have a very active chess community in Massachusetts. He is currently ranked 6th among all the players. Again, he's an international master, not only grandmaster, but again, he has beaten grandmaster, which puts him really among the top in the country. So we're going to present a game that he played. When was this play game?
Well, this was Labor Day weekend, wasn't it? The New England Open?
This is actually from this past Labor Day weekend at Leominster.
Against playing a young player named Andrew Wang.
Oh, yes. Andrew Wang is a national master, 16 years old, lives in Cambridge, and used to live in Sharon. By the way, his mother, I should say something about Andrew Wang, his mother is the webmaster for the Massachusetts Chess Association. So anybody who would go to masschess.org could get the website of the Massachusetts Chess Association, and Andrew Wang's mother is our webmaster. So that's a little family.
World of chess.
It is a small world. Chess is a very small world. So this was played in the at the New England Open, and this actually was the clincher. This game that Igor Foygel played against Andrew Wang clinched the title for Igor Foygel. So who had white in this game?
Okay, Foygel had white.
Okay.
Wang was black. And he opened the pawn from d2 to d4, which is a little different from what we've normally discussed. We often talk about games that open e2 to e4. d2 to d4 is just as good. It moves the center pawn. It occupies the center, opens up a diagonal for the black squared bishop, clears some space for the queen. It's another one of the popular standard openings.
Okay. All right, so Andrew Wang, in reply to d4, well, actually, there are two very commonly played moves here. One of them happens to be d5, which Wang did not play, but it's certainly a very good move. But the move that Wang played was knight f6. The knight on g8 moves to f6. They both accomplish the same objective. That is, it stops white from putting another pawn in the center, putting that e pawn to e4. So it's a very flexible move, and it's probably more popular than d5. But both are good. Both are good moves. All right. So what did
White has some possibilities. He could develop the knight on g1 to f3 at this point. A lot of players do that.
Yes.
He could play now that the bishop diagonal is open. He could play the bishop to f4 or to g5.
Yes.
Players do that. Not quite as common, but he chose probably the most common second move for white. He moved the pawn from c2 to c4. So now he's attacking 4 squares over on the black side of the board. He's giving himself space on the queen side. He'll be able to put a knight behind those pawns eventually.
Okay. All right. So black now, on his second move, now plays the pawn on g7 to g6. So he plays g6. Now, what's happened? Now, what is this a tip-off of how he plans to continue when black plays g6?
Yeah, it's a configuration which is known as the fianchetto or fianchetto, I guess.
Yeah, right. It's an Italian. There are some terms in chess that come from Italian, some come from French, some come from German. This is an Italian term, fianchetto. I'm sure we have some Italian viewers who would know that it's a diminutive form of the Italian word fianco. Fianco means flank, and fianchetto is a little flank. So what we're going to do, and we're going to see what a fianchetto is when it comes up. It's not. We haven't accomplished it yet. We're not there yet, but we're getting there. So it's now Foygel's third move.
Right, and probably the most common move here would be to play the knight on b1 to c3. However, Foygel chooses to develop the knight on g1 to f3, It's also fairly common. It develops the knight, gets it into play.
All right. All right, so on the third move, black plays bishop g7. Now we have accomplished a fianchetto. And what is a fianchetto? We have to explain to our viewers who are not that familiar with chess, know some rudimentary, parts of the game. A fianchetto is when you're placing a bishop, any bishop, on a long diagonal. That is, here's a case where the bishop on g7 controls this whole diagonal from a1 down to h8. I mean, it covers actually 8 squares. Of course, it doesn't control them because we have pawns in the way,
right.
But it's placed on a long diagonal, and white can do the same thing.
Right.
And it can be done on either side of the board, too.
Right.
It's the placement of bishops along long diagonals, yeah. That's what a fianchetto is.
And that's exactly what white does. For his next move, he could play the knight on b1 again to c3, which would be a very classical-looking setup. But he plays the pawn on g2 to g3, preparing his own fianchetto to try to control the long diagonal h1 to a8.
Okay. So at this point, on the fourth move, black is able to castle. This is the fastest. This is the fastest you can castle. You can do it in 4 moves, and that's what black did. He castles, puts his king in a safe place, and has now be able to actually use this rook actually maybe to bring it toward the center if need be. But now we've got safety for the king.
Right.
All right. So what does white do?
Well, white continues with his plan to fianchetto. He puts the bishop on f1 to g2 and prepares. He also prepares to castle.
All right. All right. So now black has to make some moves to actually allow other pieces to come into play here. This bishop on c8 is still impeded by the pawns on the pawn on d7 as well as the pawn on b7. But by playing d6, which he did, he played d6, which now opens up now for this diagonal for this bishop now to move out. So that's what he played on the 5th move.
And that's a signature move of an opening called the King's Indian. Is that what?
Yes. Now the King's, it's very interesting. This in defense. We've never presented to our viewers a King's Indian defense. Yeah. But this is actually an old opening that goes back several hundred years, and it was played actually in the late 1880s. You know who actually who championed this in the late 1800s, 1880s, 1890s? Was Mikhail Chigorin of Russia. We did a program on Mikhail Chigorin, who was the founder of the Russian school. But then it fell out of disfavor, and it didn't reappear again until the 1920s, 30s. That was an era known as the hypermodern period, where we had players from Europe who had some other ideas as far as adopting the fianchetto. Right. Now, it's interesting that most of the countries of the world refer to this defense as the King's Indian defense. In Italy, seeing that we mentioned fianchetto, they don't call it the King's Indian. They call it the East Indian defense. And in Italian, they call it Difesa Est Indiana. But most of the world refers to this as the King's Indian defense. All right. So what did Foygel do now?
Well, he continues with his plan to castle, which is what he does. So,
all right, puts his king in the safe place. All right. So now Wang, on his 6th move, develops another piece, a new piece. The knight on b8 goes to 6, so c6. Knight c6 is his move.
Right.
All right, so
Foigel's going to continue with his development. He could move his bishop, but he chooses to develop the knight on b1 to c3. Good, solid development.
Now, is he with that move? Is he threatening something on the next move? What does that move? Well, knight c3 prepare something?
Since the first move of the game, black has been preventing white from playing the pawn on e2 to e4. Now, by playing the knight to c3, now white can play e2 to e4.
All right, so he can do that if he wishes.
Right.
So what Wang did on his 7th move, he played the bishop on c8 to f5. So bishop f5 stops white from playing that pawn to e4. By the way, black controls that e4 square right now.
Yeah, well, black. Yeah, in a defense like the King's Indian, black doesn't really want to give white too much of an overwhelming pawn front, so that's why he wants to control that square.
Okay.
Okay. So Foygel now decides he's going to advance this the d4 pawn to D5, attacking the knight on C6.
All right, so that knight has to move. Can't
Right.
stay there, otherwise
Right.
it will be lost. Now, the knight could go back where it came from, but that would be a terrible waste of time to retreat, you know. Instead, the knight, he plays the knight to A5, and by playing the knight to A5 on the 8th move, this knight now attacks the undefended pawn on C4.
Right.
All right, so, but there are some drawbacks. As a rule, is it good to put a knight on the side of the board, or on the what we call the rim? Isn't there an old saying? What's the old saying?
Knight on the rim is grim? Or,
Yes.
Yeah.
A knight on the rim is grim. That's an old saying that all serious chess players know.
Because
That
it tends
you
to
don't want to put the knights on the side on the side of the board.
Right, it tends to get stranded out there.
Yeah, exactly.
So knights belong in the center of the board.
But again, the knight here is attacking this pawn.
Right.
So what does White do about this?
White has a couple of choices. What he does is he comes back, he'll play the knight on F3 to D2 to defend it. He could also play the knight to D4.
Yes.
Attacking
the bishop.
the bishop, not to win the bishop because the bishop is protected, but
Right.
if Black goes ahead with his plan of taking the C4 pawn, then after the exchange...
Can we show that? Can we show our viewers if we actually zoom in on the board here? And let's see that. So you're saying that knight D4, what happens if Black now captures this undefended pawn? Let's see this. Okay, and if you move away so we can see knight takes C4. Now White takes knight takes here.
On F5.
The G pawn, G takes F5. Okay.
And now the queen goes to D3, simultaneously attacking the knight and gaining the pawn.
So he would have to retreat the knight, but then he would lose the pawn.
Right.
So nothing is gained by Black.
And
by
the
taking
king's
that pawn.
position is
yes, this is bad.
compromised.
This is a very bad position. So let's go back, put the pieces back to what they were. This is here. The knight's here. So what he did instead was
he chose to move the knight back to D2, defending the pawn.
Okay. All right. So now here's where Black on his 9th move plays C5. It actually opens up a way for the queen to come out along this diagonal.
Right.
But it seems like a good move.
Okay.
All right. So what does White do here?
Well, you know, it's always pesky to have an enemy, the opponent's bishop, you know, covering a diagonal that cuts right through the center of your position.
Yes.
What Foygel does is, because he has two knights on the E4 square, he plays the pawn on E2 to E4, threatening the bishop.
Yeah. In fact, he had total control of that square. Right. Not only the two knights, but this bishop on G2.
And the bishop as well. Right.
So he has great support to advance that pawn to E4. Well, now the bishop's under attack, and the bishop has to move. Now, what Wang played here is he played what he should have played, according to Foygel. After the game, Igor Foygel, you know, made some comments about Wang's play and said he should have played the bishop back to D7, retreated to this square, but instead Wang played the bishop to G4, attacking the queen. All right. So what did Foygel do now?
Well, the choices are, I mean, he could block it with his bishop if he wanted to. In a game that was played not with Foygel but by a woman grandmaster, Alla Kushnir, in the same position, she played F3.
I see.
Chasing away the bishop.
Right.
What Foygel chose was to take the queen from D1 and play it to C2.
Okay. All right. So now we have Black has to make a decision as far as how to continue. Now he could have he could have considered playing like the queen maybe to D7 or possibly the queen to C8. The whole idea of this is to threaten to bring the bishop here to H3 and try to trade off the bishops. However, White could stop that by just simply moving that rook over to E1, and then the rook then the bishop, if it went to H3, that white bishop could just retreat to H1. And the bishop would be saved. All right, but instead, Wang played A6. He moves the pawn to A6. All right.
All right, and then Foygel plays the pawn on B2 to B3. This gives extra protection to the c4 pawn, but also opens up a place for the bishop on c1 to come to b2.
And fianchetto. Then we have a queen's fianchetto, right?
right.
We did a king's fianchetto on the king's side. Now we'll be able to fianchetto the dark squared bishop on the queen's side. All right, so Wang, it's his 12th move coming up. Well, he plays b5. Wait a minute. I thought white controls this b5 square. How is it possible that black plays b5 here?
Right.
So, can't white win a pawn here?
Well, yeah.
What's wrong? Is something wrong with this?
Well, yes. A little simple arithmetic would show that, first of all, if white were to take the bishop, the pawn on b5,
C takes b5, then he returns with A takes b5,
and then to take the pawn with the knight, it leaves the e2 square. It wins the pawn, but it leaves this square unprotected.
So the punishment, this would be refuted by bishop e2, forking the rook and the knight, and it would cost white material. Right. Yes. So that's why this is poison. All right, he can't take that pawn. All right, so we'll go back to here. All right, this is here.
Right.
All right, so he plays b5. So white does not take this pawn because of that.
Takes the opportunity to place his bishop from c1 to b2, contesting the long a1 to h8 diagonal.
Okay. All right. So now black continues on his 13th move. The pawn on b5 takes pawn on c4. B takes c4 is his move.
Right.
All right. So now we have the first capture of the game on the 13th move.
And so white could capture in two ways. He could capture with the knight on d2 to c4, but we were talking about how the bishop, the knight is stuck out there. The knight really has only, can't go anywhere down here, can't go to c6, it can only go
to b7.
b7.
And look at, the queen is working hard to protect the knight. So it's holding this queen to this along this diagonal to protect the knight.
Right.
All right.
So rather than give black the option of trading off this weak knight, he wants to keep that knight stuck where it is, keep it trapped, and so he recaptures with the pawn.
All right.
We take d4.
All right. So that was his 14th move.
C4.
C4. All right. What Wang did on his 14th move, the bishop on g7, he moves to h6. Bishop h6. Now, does he have a threat? Is there a threat here by playing the bishop to h6? You see this knight that's under attack here? What is that knight defending?
Well, the knight is defending this pawn, and now that pawn would fall.
So if he can eliminate this knight, he has a chance to win this pawn.
Right, and a good post for that.
Yes, exactly. So what does white do here?
Well,
he sees white has to see the threat here.
And this in a way, this is the value of not having blocked with f3, because now he didn't have to waste a move. He plays directly the pawn on f2 to f4, blocking off that diagonal.
All right, so now it's blocked. All right. Now, what Wang now played, he retreated this bishop. He realized he plays back to d7. Bishop d7 is his move. So he comes back here. Okay, so he has, he doesn't have control, well, he does have control of, well, not exactly control of the a4 square, but we're going to see why he played this bishop back to d7, hopefully. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so what happens now?
Foygel decides to move the pawn from the knight from c3 to d1, opens up this diagonal somewhat, also gives a little extra protection to the pawn.
Yeah. As Foygel pointed out after the game, the other move he considered was moving the rook on a1 to e1 along the e file to support the support the advance of the e pawn. But his idea of playing the knight back to d1 instead, he has an idea. We're going to see. We're going to show our viewers what his plan is by playing the knight. He disconnects the rooks. The rooks were connected. Now with the knight back on d1, we've disconnected those rooks. But there's an idea that he has by playing that. So what Wang plays here on his 16th move, he seizes the open file and puts a rook on b8. Rook b8 is his move.
Right. But by having played the knight to d1, he now makes the c3 square available for his bishop attacking the knight.
So he's attacking the knight.
Which keeps the queen
which keeps the queen along this tied down. It's working hard to defend this knight. All right, so what does Wang do after bishop c3? Well, he would like to bust up, these pawns, break apart these pawns, which actually control this center here. So he plays e6. That's his move. Okay. E6.
And Foygel advances his e4 pawn to e5. Now we have this block of 4 pawns. The knight is attacked. So
right.
now something has to give here.
Okay, now this is a critical point of the game. Now, I'm of the opinion that this knight under attack should have retreated, should have actually probably retreated back like this. What Wang did instead, he plays the d pawn, d takes e5, and by doing so, he allows Foygel to do what?
Well, he recaptures f take e5, opening up this f file is critical, and the knight still is being threatened.
Yes. So it opens up this very dangerous f file. So what Wang does here, he plays the knight to g4. All right. So what's his idea?
Well, he has a check with the bishop.
Exactly.
And if white were to recapture, he would fork the queen and rook.
I see.
And in any case, even if he did.
All right. So he has control of this e3 square.
Right.
So what does Foygel do now?
Well, he takes the queen from c2. Moves it to e4, centralizing his queen and threatening the knight and doing away with the threat.
All right. So he has, but the major threat, as you pointed out, now he actually stops the knight from coming in here. But the big thing is he's attacking this unprotected knight.
Right.
So what Wang does here, this pawn on e6, he captures the pawn on d5. He takes d5, allowing the bishop on d7 to protect the pawn, the knight on g4. All right, so what does Foygel do now? His queen is under attack.
He needs to recapture.
Right, okay.
It makes more sense to recapture with the pawn. He plays c take d5. It connects 2 pawns. One of them is passed and one of them is nearly passed.
And does he have a threat? There's a threat here, isn't it?
And he's threatening to push now to e6, blocking off.
Yes, if he pushes that pawn, he gets a lot of places. He's cut off the defense of this knight, allowing a double attack. The pawn would be attacking the bishop, and the queen would be attacking the knight. He'd be losing a piece.
Right.
So in order to stop that, what Wang did was to play a move, but evidently he overlooked Foygel's response to it. He played bishop f5, attacking the queen.
Right. And any player, your first reaction is, well, where am I going to put my queen? Do I back it up?
Exactly.
Do I look for a free square? But there's a good piece of advice that a lot of commentators give. Is always look for the unusual move. Take the time to look for something that doesn't. And what Foygel finds is he takes the rook on f1 and he captures. He takes the bishop on f5.
Okay, so wait a minute. He's sacrificing
a stronger piece,
a major piece here, a rook, for a bishop, a minor piece.
Right.
Okay, and so this is a tactic. This is a combination that's coming up here. So now he's got to take back, otherwise he'll be down a whole piece. The rook would retreat and save itself. So he plays g takes f5. Right. So that's what Wang plays on his 22nd move. What does Foygel do now?
So he takes the pawn on f5, threatening the knight.
Right, and the knight only has 1 square. It can't come back here because white controls these square, the f6 square. So the move he has is knight e3. So he comes here, forks the queen and this knight, but the bishop is defending it.
Right. So now Foygel is not going to waste his time moving. Like he doesn't have that many places that he wants to move the queen. The queen is perfectly good where it is.
Good where it is. Yes.
So he's going to capture because he moved that knight to d1. He can now capture the knight on e3.
All right. So he captures there, forcing black now to play. Bishop takes e3. Check. The first check of the game. It came on the 24th move. Now the king is under attack.
King is going to move to the safety of the corner here. King to h1.
Okay. All right. So now what Wang played here after the king moves to h1, he plays f6.
Right.
He wants to dissolve these pawns here. Right. But what happens now?
Yeah, Foygel takes the knight on d2, plays it to e4, and that's when Wang resigns.
Okay. Well, it's going to be either mate or a loss of a queen.
Loss of a lot of material.
Okay, chess fans, that was an exciting game played by Igor Foygel against the national master Andrew Wang. Stay tuned next month for another exciting episode of Chess Chat. See you then.